Hey dudes, welcome to Splat from the Past, the only 80s themed horror and sci-fi show where things can get totally radical. Now today, I will be welcoming a legendary stuntman of Hollywood, and I am talking about Gary Kent. The man worked on many classic TV shows in the 60s, like The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and The Green Hornet, and he worked on a lot of classic exploitation movies, particularly in the biker genre. You know, he worked on Hell's Angels on Wheels, The Savage Seven. He also was a producer, director, writer. He worked on some horror movies like Dracula vs. Frankenstein, The House of Seven Corpses, and many others. And I'm having him on today to talk about all that stuff. He also has some ties to the Spahn Ranch. I believe he worked there a lot back in the 60s, and I want to find out more about that. And I can't wait. It's going to be very exciting. So yeah, here is my interview with Gary Kent. Gary?
Hello, Tommy. How you doing?
I'm great. How are you, sir?
I'm okay, thank you. Just came from a screening of a new documentary that was kind of interesting.
Oh, what was the documentary about?
It was about Bob Burns. I don't know if you knew Bob or not.
I've heard of him. Yeah,
he was the art director on Chainsaw Massacre, the original.
Mm-hmm.
And plus The Hells Have Eyes and The Dark and a bunch of other films.
Right.
And it was about his fascination with Rondo Hatton. Remember the Creeper, the old horror actor from years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it was interesting. It was about both of them and how their careers intertwined.
Wow, wonderful. Was it good?
Yeah, it was good. Well done.
Nice. I'll check it out when I can get to it. But this is such a great honor. Thank you for taking the time today.
No problem. No problem. Thank you.
My pleasure, sir. So going back in time, I was reading, you studied journalism in college and played football, and you did pole vaulting in track and field, and then you entered the Navy. But before the Navy, were you on the trajectory of going into journalism or sports?
Yes, that was my, excuse me,
Mm-hmm.
My allergies are driving me crazy here in Austin. But yeah, I planned a career in journalism. I wanted to be a writer and preferably a sports writer.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my goal till I got called to active duty in the Naval Air. I was in the Naval Air Reserve, and I decided to go because I wanted to see the world. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was a good way of doing it. And instead of seeing the world, I saw Corpus Christi, Texas. So
mm-hmm.
that was that.
What year did you go into the Navy?
Oh, golly, I think it was 52.
52. That was right after Korea?
Right, Korea was... Excuse me, I'm so sorry. Give me just 1 sec.
Okay.
Darn. Korea ended about 2 months after I got in active duty.
Mm-hmm. And did you see any combat or anything dangerous while you were there?
I did not. They sent me right to Corpus, and the Blue Angels, the Navy elite flying team, the Blue Angels, had just been transferred to Corpus from Pensacola, Florida, and they needed a public information officer. So they saw I was majoring in journalism and that I owed them some active duty, so I was their man.
Nice. I was reading you did promotion and publicity for the Blue Angels. Was that what ultimately gave you some interest in pursuing show business?
No, what did was I had my nose broken in high school when I was playing football,
mm-hmm.
and I couldn't play for a couple months, so I turned out for a school play, and I just fell in love with the theater department and acting. And so when I was in Corpus, I did a lot of theater work for the Navy. The Navy wanted to have the sailors get along better with the townspeople. They wanted to kind of interact. And there was this theater called the Little Theater Corpus Christi, and they wanted me to go out and do some plays out there and get other Navy personnel involved to improve relations. And so I did, but it got me back in the theater again. And then eventually I decided to move to Houston, Texas, where they had a couple of legitimate off-Broadway houses, the Playhouse Theater and the Alley Theater. And Houston were both very, very good professional theaters. So I moved to Houston to get into professional theater, which I did, almost by accident.
What kind of plays did you do?
Oh, golly. We did a lot. We did Walls Rise Up, Another Language, Twelfth Night, Shakespeare's Twelfth Night, The Drunkard, the play The Drunkard. Come on, let's see, that one, Dear Ruth. Golly, it's been so long ago, Tommy, I'm trying to remember. But I did a ton of them.
Yeah. Did you do any Shakespeare?
Yes, Twelfth Night.
Twelfth Night, yeah. Did someone tell you at the theater company that you had talent and it was time for you to move to Hollywood?
No. They told me I had talent, and I was signed on immediately. I drove a friend to the Playhouse Theater to audition, and while I was there, the director saw me in the lobby and said, "Are you here to read?" And I thought, well, why not? So I said yes, and I read, and I got signed on to the Playhouse as a juvenile lead, opposite Catherine Hellman, who later on did Soap, the series Soap. Yeah. And a couple of other films, but she was the ingenue lead, and I was a juvenile lead at the Playhouse Theater. And when it broke up finally, financially. They couldn't cut it anymore, and all the people were going to New York, all the actors, except I had just seen On the Waterfront with Marlon Brando, and I thought, no, that's what I want to do, is that kind of work. And I knew they were doing it in Hollywood, so I took a Greyhound to Hollywood.
And what year was that?
Golly, that was like 55.
55. And that was near the end of the old contract studio system? Right. Yeah, did you go on a lot of auditions to get a contract with the studio?
No, when I got there, I noticed every actor in town was trying to get an agent or get signed on at the studios, and the casting people were just saying, "Thank you very much," and taking their pictures and throwing them in the trash. Yeah. And I thought, man, I can't go through that. I've got to go to work. So I noticed I was watching a Frank Sinatra movie shoot on Gower Street in Hollywood, and they were shooting a car chase, and I heard the assistant director say, "Okay, stuntman, stand by your vehicles." And I saw these guys that looked like gladiators to me, standing by their cars, and they said, "Okay, start your engines, action," and these cars started crashing into each other, and guys got out and got in fist fights and stuff. And I thought, that's what I want to do. How can I get in that? So I decided I was going to become a stuntman somehow.
It's crazy how you go through life, with one passion, and then you switch to another, and then another. It's just it can happen at any time, just a drop of a hat. Absolutely, Tommy. Yeah. So I'm going to mention movies and TV shows that you did stunt work on. Tell me anything you remember to the best of your ability.
Okay.
The Man from U.N.C.L.E.
Oh, golly. I love The Man from U.N.C.L.E., the TV series, of course. I had done 2 Westerns up in Utah, and for Jack Nicholson and Monty Hellman. Jack was just getting started. But he was starring in them, and he'd co-written, or he'd written one of them. And so while we were up there, there was this fellow, a friend of Jack's named John Hackett, who also was an actor. And he was a good friend of Robert Vaughn's. And I had gotten kind of a good rep when I was up in Utah doing stunts, because there was a lot of horse work. And then the Daniel Boone company came up while we were in Kanab, Utah. Came up while we were there, and they hired me to come over and work on Daniel Boone for a couple weeks. So when I got back to L.A., I had some experience as a stuntman. So John Hackett, who was a friend of Robert Vaughn, the man from Uncle, their stuntman was, Dick Gary, was leaving to co-direct a movie, I think, in Europe somewhere, and Robert Vaughn needed a new stuntman. And John Hackett said, Gary Kent, he's a great stuntman. He was just up in Utah. He doubled Nicholson, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. So they sent me in. I met Robert Vaughn, and that's how I got to work on Man from Uncle, and it was a blast. I really enjoyed working it.
Yeah. Do you know how many episodes you did?
Oh, golly. I think I did about 12, actually.
About 12.
Before Dick Gary came back. I can remember like 3 or 4 of them, but I did 12, I think.
How about the shoot?
Robert Vaughn was great. I will say this about him. Robert Vaughn did not like to do any action at all. He didn't even want to run across the street. So his stuntman was getting a lot of work, which was me. So I loved him for that reason. I would get called in to just do a small fight somewhere and get a lot of money, get paid a lot of money for it. So I was really, really pleased. Plus, David McCallum did some of his stunts, the easy stuff, but still, stunts are dangerous no matter what. Something can go wrong anytime. Yeah. And but David liked to mix it up a bit, and I got to do a lot of stunts where he and I played rangers or played, he would just put on a different costume other than Ilya Kuryakin. He would be a ranger or a bad guy or whatever, and we would do stunts together and just laugh. I mean, we had more fun on that show.
Yeah. And David McCallum, he's still out there working.
Yeah, he is. He is.
Yeah, he was on that Navy NCIS show for a long time. How about the shooting?
The shooting, well, that was one of the movies we did up in Utah. In fact, it was the first one. We shot two up there, Nicholson Westerns, I call them. Monty Hellman really directed them. But the shooting was with Warren Oates and Mellie Perkins and Jack Nicholson. And it was just, my first real appreciation of a really good director. Monty Hellman was a good director, I thought, because I had been around Ray Dennis Steckler. I'd been around some of the characters, but they really weren't good directors. They were just making movies, but not very good movies. Suddenly, we were up in Utah making good movies. I thought so anyway, and I thought the shooting was really, really well done.
Yeah.
A bit esoteric, a little esoteric, but nonetheless a good film.
Yeah, Monty Hellman, he was one of those guys like Sam Fuller, who basically just, he had his own vision and he did it his way without studio interference.
Correct.
Yeah. When you were working with Jack, did you say to yourself, this guy's going to be a huge star someday?
Yes. Out of all the people I worked with back in the beginning times of independent film that I worked a lot, Jack was the standout. We all knew, even that he took it all very seriously. He didn't goof around a lot. He smoked a lot of pot. But other than that, he was cool. And he wasn't a huggy-feely kind of guy, but he was friendly. And he also co-produced. So I remember the crew went on strike because we were overworked and underpaid. And Monty wouldn't meet with us, or the production manager, Paul Lewis, but Jack met with us and worked it out so that we all got a slight bump in pay and we got our hours smoothed out. And it was because of Jack. He was one of the guys. He was easy to work with.
Yeah. And you worked with him again on Hell's Angels on Wheels.
Correct. And Psych Out. I did Psych Out with him.
Yeah. What do you remember making on Hell's Angels on Wheels?
Well, we shot in Bakersfield, California, and we used real Hell's Angels on it as extras. They and their bikes. And I just remember all the stuntmen, all the bikers wanted to do stunts, but we couldn't use them on stunts because they were always too wasted. You have to be, have your wits together doing stunts. And they didn't. They were always boozed up or doped up or something. But some of them were nice guys. But I had to work with them a lot because we had a lot of fights to do on that film. And I had to direct them, the fights. And again, I was working with not only stunt guys, my stunt guys that I brought up, Chuck Bale and a bunch of other guys, Bobby Hoy and some other people. But I also had to weave in and out of those fights the real Hell's Angels. And again, a lot of them were too wasted to remember the choreography. As you know, fights have to be choreographed.
Right.
Someone's going to get a busted lip or something. And so I had to really find out who was really straight on what day to do a fight that they could remember what they were doing. So I had my hands full on that picture. But again, I was working with a director I dearly love, Richard Rush, who I worked for a lot. And he was directing Hell's Angels on Wheels. And I just admire the guy so much. Plus Jack was doing really good work.
Well, there was so many of those outlaw biker movies in the late 60s, early 70s. What do you think was the appeal of them at the time?
Well, as you know, the Westerns had ended. The big day of the Western was pretty well shot and gone. And so it was replaced by the bikers. That lonesome guy that is sort of a rebel, an outlaw, but really a nice guy, probably writes poetry or something.
Yeah.
They really didn't in real life, but that was the image they had. The bikers had this image of being tough as nails, but probably sweethearts, loved their mother down deep. A lot of them would shoot their mother, but we didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah, because there was just so many of them. And then by 72, 73, they were all gone.
Absolutely.
That genre had moved on. It's never really been revived. There was that comedy movie Travolta did with Tim Allen and all them, Wild Hogs, but that was like about it.
Right.
Yeah. And you did The Savage Seven, which was also a biker movie.
Correct.
Any good memories of that?
Well, I got hurt on Savage 7. I got my ribs busted, so that's one of the things I remember. But again, we were shooting in Utah and Nevada, and I just remember I loved working location and with the stunt crews. And we were on location in this little place called Searchlight, Nevada. And I just remember we not only did we do a bunch of fights, but we also played major roles in the film. I would have been, one of the leading character actors in the film had I not gotten hurt. But I got my ribs busted, and I missed about half of the film.
Oh, wow.
But not too long ago, Tommy, about maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I got a call from the Alamo Theater here in Austin. They said, Quentin Tarantino's in town, and he's showing one of his favorite films, and you're in it. And he said, you're one of his favorite stuntmen. Would you come down to the screening? And so I thought they were kidding me, but I went down anyway, and sure enough, there was Quentin, and Savage 7 was one of his favorite films.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. he loves like so many exploitation movies.
Yeah.
Did you get to know Penny Marshall on that movie?
Yes, I did. Two ways, Tommy.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. One. I apologize for my voice going.
It's okay.
One was I had to. We had some time off on a weekend, and we decided Max Julian, who later on black actor, really good, who did The Mac and Thomasine and Bushrod, several other films, including Savage 7.
Mm-hmm.
Max had a big Cadillac, and he was going to drive from a location in Nevada back to L.A. for the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And I offered to ride with him. He wanted some company, and I said, I'll go back and visit my kids. And Penny Marshall wanted to ride. So Max and I and Penny Marshall rode all the way to L.A. Together, singing songs and carrying on. And then coming back, Max had some great ganja, some great pot, and we were all smoking it, and Penny just fell asleep in the back seat. But Max and I really carried on because we were just stoned as fish, and we saw a flying saucer. Not only did that happen, but our car got jammed up out in the middle of the desert, and they sent a car from the location looking for us, and they found us stranded out in the middle of the desert, where we had spent the night watching flying saucers. So since that time, Max and I have always had a kind of a thing where we knew what each other were thinking, where we were, if we were in trouble. He's a good friend of mine to this day. But that was with Penny. Then the second thing with Penny I'll mention is Penny roomed with a girl named Susan White, the young actress who was in the film, had a bit part in the film, who I had known in L.A. We'd been friends. We belonged to the same drama group. Well, she and Penny were roommates on the film, and they shared this one big bed. Anyway, Susan and I drove to Las Vegas on one of the weekends to just gamble and carry on. And when we came back, it was late at night, and I went by my room. I had an early call the next morning. She took me to my room. I was rooming with John Bud Gardos, another stuntman. Bud was in the room gambling. He had a bunch of guys there, and they were playing poker, and it looked like it was going to be an all-nighter. Everyone was smoking cigarettes and gambling money, and I'm not a gambler. Doing stunts is gamble enough for me. So I told Susan, damn it, I can't get in there and get in. She said, come on, sleep at my place. So I went to her room, and there was Penny already asleep in bed. So Susan put me in the middle, and I got in bed, and she got in bed. So I'm one of the few people that can say I got to sleep with Penny Marshall.
That's awesome. Yeah, I interviewed Penny's daughter, Tracy. She was one of my earliest interviews. And I was devastated when Penny died, because I felt like comedy died when Penny died.
Yeah, she was so cool. She was so funny.
Talented.
And so talented, really a talented lady.
Yeah, she could perform comedy and she can direct comedy very well.
Yes, absolutely.
How about the Green Hornet?
You know, I did a car chase on the Green Hornet, and I thought, I'm trying to remember, I think I only did like 3 of them. And I never worked with Bruce Lee. I was on the set, or he was on the set, but I never did a fight with him or a stunt with him. I did it with other cast members. Yeah.
Did you have any interaction with him?
Just other than to talk, casual conversation with him.
No.
That was about it. I didn't know much about Bruce Lee. I was very glad to get the gig and to get the job. And I just remember the car chase. I had to do a car chase over I was going to say Benedict Canyon, but it's not. It's one of the canyons in L.A. going over to the beach. And we had to do a big car chase, and I remember the cameraman almost lost the camera. He was shooting in the back of a pickup truck. He had the camera mounted and going around one of the curtains. It was a high-speed chase. going around one of the curves, the camera tipped over and almost rolled out the bed of the truck with the cameraman still attached to it. It didn't, but man, it almost did.
Wow. How about A Man Called Dagger?
That's where I met Richard Rush. Listen.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hold the line just a second?
Yeah.
Good God. They're working on the apartment here, and there's so much noise going on. I'm sorry, what did you ask me again? Man Called Dagger.
Right.
Yes. The costume woman on the two westerns, we did it up in Utah.
Yeah.
I was having lunch with her at Musso Frank's in Hollywood after those two movies. Mm-hmm. And she said, "You're a really good stuntman. And I'm doing a film called Man Called Dagger, this director, Richard Rush, and they need someone to do stunts and special effects." And I said, "Well, that's me. I can do I didn't do special effects. I just lied and figured I'll figure out how to do them if I get the gig." So she sent me over to meet Richard Rush, and I met him, and he seemed like a great guy. He walked in, he was handsome, fast on his feet, knew what he wanted, had his act together. But the movie was full of, if you've seen Dagger, it's full of effects. So I had to learn to do all of these explosions and stuff very quickly, plus do stunts. But I loved it because Richard Rush was obviously a really good director. Mm-hmm. So that was my entree into Richard Rush's movies.
How about Freebie and the Bean?
Freebie and the Bean was Richard Rush again, too. We shot up in San Francisco. I loved it. I think, of course, we did a lot of car chases, and I like doing car work. Mm-hmm. And I think the car chases in Freebie and the Bean are as good as those in Bullet. And they're more creative. They're different. They're really strange. I mean, we did car chases through restaurants. We just really burned up the city of San Francisco. And and each stuntman had their own driver to drive us to and from the set. We, of course, had our own hotel rooms. They treated us like kings on that movie. And Alan Arkin and James Caan were so funny. And they had it so together. I will tell you one story. It's been told before, so I'm not going to spill any beans. But when I arrived on the set, they'd been shooting for about a week, and they called me up, and I got out of the car. The driver drove me up to the set, and Richard Rush was standing over by a tree with Alan Arkin and James Caan. It looked like they were having an argument. Wow. And as I walked closer, I heard Alan Arkin say, "I don't understand why my character would do this." And Richard Rush said, "Did it ever dawn on you, you may not have the capacity to understand why your character would do that?" I thought, "Oh, man, good retort, Richard. One for you." But they were so good, and I love that movie. I still think it's really funny.
Yeah, it's one of the earliest buddy cop movies, and a lot of people forgot about it and stuff. I heard, I think it was Alan Arkin or James Caan, or maybe even both, said that they didn't like the movie overall, but you know, it was genre defining.
Right, absolutely.
You worked with Richard Rush again on Color of Night.
Yes.
And
yes, Color.
That was Bruce Willis.
I'm not, just between you and I'm not a huge Bruce Willis fan. I don't know him well, but he seemed a bit full of himself. To me, this is just to me on the set. Again, I called on the movie. I was shooting another movie for a Chinese company, and I was in New York when they started Color of Night. So I came on the shoot after I finished working in New York. And I got to L.A., and it just seemed on the set, who needs bodyguards? But Bruce Willis would have bodyguards following him around on the set, or an entourage. He would leave his trailer, which would be about 50 yards from where we're shooting, but he would have to have a golf cart take him from his trailer to the set, which he could have walked in 2 seconds. So he just seemed, I wasn't really impressed with him. We did a lot of car chases, some of it very, very dangerous, much more so than Freebie. However, they didn't play that well in the film. They're okay, but they're not what I had hoped it would turn out to be. They're just kind of car chases as compared to wow car chases.
Yeah. Well, I lost count, but you're one of many people I've interviewed who told me they didn't like working with Bruce Willis either, so don't feel bad.
Good.
Yeah. How about working with Don Coscarelli on Bubba Hotep?
I love Don Coscarelli.
Yeah.
What a guy. Bubba Hotep, my good friend Bob Ivey had been Coscarelli's stunt director stunt coordinator on the Phantasm movies. But Don wanted him to play the mummy in this movie. So he said, can you recommend a stunt coordinator? And Bob recommended me. They sent me the script. And the first page of the script has Elvis in bed examining his penis, which is swollen and dripping ooze. And I read that and thought, I don't want to do this movie. This is terrible. Why would anyone want to do this movie? So I told Bob, I didn't even read on. I just read that, the first page, and it was awful. And Bob said, I'm going to send you a movie Coscarelli directed, because I turned this one down, Bubba Hotep. And they sent me a thing he did called Kenny and Company, I think was the name of it. A coming-of-age story about young guys. It was so well done, I thought, and so insightful and so tender in so many ways. And I thought, okay, I'd like to work for this guy. It was a rough shoot. We were shooting mostly at night. Night shoots are always a little tougher, takes longer to get everything done. Everyone is kind of out of sorts because they can never get to sleep when they get off. They're exhausted, but their brains are wired and they keep going. They can't lie down and get a good night's rest because you're working all night. And that was the way on Color of Night, but it was creative. It was funny. We knew we were making something pretty good. And again, Don Coscarelli is a jewel as a director. I worked for a lot of yellers and screamers, so I don't have any truck with that anymore. If someone yells at me, they're going to get a knuckle sandwich. Yeah. So it was really nice to have directors like Richard Brush and Coscarelli and Monty Hellman, who were really good, but they never had to resort to pushing their weight around.
Yeah, Don's a great guy. I've met him a couple of times.
Yeah. He is. And you get caught up in his enthusiasm.
Yeah.
He can make you feel great. You're going to light a match or something. He makes you think it's the most important thing in the world.
Yeah, he makes everyone feel comfortable around him, I see.
Yes, absolutely.
I see you played a gas tank worker in Peter Bogdanovich's first movie, Targets.
Right.
Yeah, what was it like working with him?
Again, I liked Peter. He was different. He knew what he was doing for the most part. He wasn't yet quite like Richard or Monty or Coscarelli. I hadn't worked for Coscarelli at the time. But I had met Peter. I belonged to a drama group in Hollywood, and we had advertised in the trade papers and Variety that we needed a director for our group. And I was standing on a landing. Where our group met was this apartment that was on the hillside out in the Echo Park district of L.A. And I was standing out on this landing, and all of a sudden this body came hurtling down the stairs, out of control, dropping papers and ass over a tea kettle, so to speak. And I grabbed him, and it was Peter Bogdanovich. I didn't know who he was, but he was answering the ad for the director for this group. and I saved him. He was just not a really agile person, Peter. Richard Rush was very agile, by the way. But anyway, Peter wasn't. But he came and he met the people from the group. And the next thing I knew, he was doing this movie called Targets. Mm-hmm. And he called me, and as well as other members of our group, and cast us in the movie. And he had me also do the special effects. I did all the shooting and Targets, where I had to shoot out the window panes and shoot through the glass in the projection booth at the drive-in theater, and all of that sort of thing. So that's how I met Peter, and I liked him. I thought he was a fun guy.
Yeah, I mean, he was a movie critic, who broke into breaking movies after Roger Corman took him under his wing.
Yes. One of my favorite Peter Bogdanovich stories, and you've probably heard it, is Gary Graver, a good friend of mine who was a cameraman, was shooting Orson Welles' last movie. I forget the name, The Other Side of the Wind or something. And they were shooting, I forget where, New Mexico or Arizona or someplace. And he had John Huston and Orson and a bunch of other people there. And Peter Bogdanovich flew down. And they were all sitting around the table having dinner one night. And Peter Bogdanovich was carrying on and on and on, and about directing and how it should be done. And John Huston said, how many movies have you directed, Peter? And he went, 2. And Huston said, it makes it easy to count then, doesn't it?
Yeah, I actually have heard that story now that I think of it. Yeah. True story. That's a good one, yeah. How did you get to be an assistant director on Dracula versus Frankenstein?
Al needed an assistant director, and I had my goal set on eventually I wanted to direct. And so I thought, well, one way to get there is to be an assistant to the director. And Al needed an assistant for sure. And so when he was getting ready to do that movie, I just said, I would sure like to be your assistant. And Al was just great to me. I have to say that. Whenever you think of his movies, for me, he was really good for giving me a lot of work in different areas that I wanted. Not only did I get to play a lead in a film with him, Satan Sadist, I didn't even have to read for it. I just got the part out of the blue. I scarcely knew Al. But also, I did a variety of different jobs for him, so I could just add them to my resume and sort of pick up more experience. And a lot of it was working Al Adamson films.
Wow. Yeah, and you were an assistant or an associate producer on The House of Seven Corpses.
Yes.
How did you get involved with that project?
I had a dear friend named Paul Lewis, who was a great production manager who later became a producer. And he did a lot of Dennis Hopper's movies. He and Dennis were close friends. But Paul, I had worked with Paul on a bunch of commercials as his assistant. And he called me and said, how would you like to production manage an entire movie? And I said, I'd love to. And he said, okay, come with me. We're going to Utah, and I'll introduce you to people. So I went to Utah with Paul, and he sort of broke me in production managing on that movie, House of Seven Corpses. And I met, it was a rough shoot, but again, I met some wonderful people. And Carol Wells, who was married to Larry Doheny of the famous Doheny's, oil Doheny's of, I think, Standard Oil. And other people on that film, and John Ireland, who was a gas. John Ireland smoked pot like you wouldn't believe. And I remember going into a restaurant. Of course, it was in Utah, and it's a dry state. So you had to belong to a private club to get any booze at all. And movie crews, they're always thirsty, especially after working 14 hours. So we all joined these private clubs, and I went to this private club one night, and I went into the restroom, and I could just smell pot all over the entire men's room. All of a sudden, the door to the stall opened, and out walked John Ireland. He was holding this big roach in his fingers, this big joint.
Yeah.
And he said, "Here, Gareth, finish this off," and he handed it to me, and out the door he went. There I was standing in Utah with this big joint, having no idea how I got it or what I was doing with it. But it came about because of John Ireland. And then we stole a train on that shoot. There was a train in this lumber yard that was right next to the motel where we were staying. And one night I was coming back from the drugstore, and I noticed it was really a switch engine going across the tracks. And here were these people singing. There was Carol Wells, who was starring in the film, and Ron Foreman, who was the art director, and Don Jones, who was the cameraman. And they were stealing that switch engine. They weren't really stealing it. They were just drunk and stoned and having a lot of fun driving it. Somehow or other, Ron Foreman knew how to do it. And so they called me, and I thought, well, I got to get them out of there or we're going to get arrested and I won't have my movie people. So I went and climbed up in the train with them, and then all of a sudden here came the engineer and the guards and everybody yelling and screaming. Carol Wells got out. She was very charming and just charmed our way out of major trouble on that film. Yeah. But a lot of the films I remember, Tommy, what it was like working them.
Yeah.
If not the film itself, because a lot of times I had an absolute blast working on a film with the cast and crew, and the film was lousy. And then I worked some films that were really, really good, where the cast and crew were not that friendly with each other. A good example of that would be Phantom of the Paradise, which we shot in Dallas. A crew from New York, and half the crew from New York, the other half from L.A., they didn't like each other. Nobody got along. It was a rough shoot, and it turned out to be a really good movie. So what can I say?
Yeah, I love that movie. You're the first one I've talked to that's ever been involved with it. Wow, I didn't know that everyone didn't like each other on it. Wow. But in House of Seven Corpses, though, John Carradine was in that, right?
Yes, he was.
Yeah, how was he?
You know, first of all, he could memorize a script in one night. I mean, the entire script, not only his lines, but everybody. He just had this photographic memory. But also, he was okay. He was starting to suffer a bit of ill health. But at night, he would go to the, again, private clubs. He would go to the bar, and he would sit at the bar and order a drink and spit on the floor. And I couldn't believe it. I just thought they're letting him do that. He just sits there and spits on the floor, and he gets away with it. So that's my memory of John Carradine. I worked with him a couple of times, and he was always a nice guy. Knew his lines. Couldn't wait to get off the set and get to the bar.
Yeah, I interviewed his granddaughter, Callista, who's David's daughter, and she told me she has great memories of her grandfather. She said that he was just a lot of fun. Yeah. You co-wrote and directed a movie called The Pyramid. What was the genesis behind that project?
I had gone to Dallas, Texas with a first-time producer from L.A. that was putting together this film called Ghetto Cop. It was going to be shot in Dallas. So he flew me down along with a friend of mine who was going to be art director and my girlfriend who was going to do wardrobe. So we flew down there, and when we got there, we found out he didn't have his money. He hadn't raised any money to do the film. So my other friend said, well, we're going back to L.A., but the art director told me, Gary, he's not ready to do a film, evidently, but you are. You ought to direct a film. You want to direct. So I just decided, well, I'll just stay here instead of going back to L.A. I had gotten a job then on Phantom of the Paradise, so I had some money coming in, and I thought I'll just stay here and write my own movie, and I'll direct my own movie somehow. So I wrote The Pyramid, and made friends with the local film people in Dallas, but I didn't have enough money to make the film. And believe it or not, so much serendipity happened with that film. Right when I said, I'm going to need money to make this film, ring, 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 the phone rang. And it was Mike McFarland, a fellow I knew from L.A., who I'd worked for at one time. And he said, I want to produce a movie. I can get some money together. Do you have anything you want to direct? And he knew I wanted to direct. And I said, yeah, I'm working on a script now. I'm almost done. So I told him the story. We made a deal. He raised the money, and I didn't have to go out at all and try to raise money. It just came like by magic.
Wow. I'd never seen the movie. Is it good?
You know, it's very, very different. I decided I wanted to make a movie not like everyone else did. I wanted to make something totally original. So I did. I used it was about the consciousness movement, which was huge in the 60s. So I made this movie about a news reporter who gets tired of bad news. I'd been a news reporter, and I knew that most of the time you give the bad news. People wanted to hear about the car crashes and the body counts. And I thought, I'm going to have my reporter do good news, and he gets fired for it because the station doesn't want good news. They want the car wreck or the shootout on the corner. So I started with that premise, and then I decided I'm going to have him being the reporter, examine leaders of the consciousness movement. Only I'm going to have him interview real leaders in the consciousness movement. So I had run into this little guy named Kim Russell, who seemed to know, from Dallas, who seemed to know everybody in the consciousness movement. So he came and picked me up. We drove to California. He introduced me to Edgar Mitchell, who was the sixth man to walk on the moon. I had him, and he was the one that conducted all the ESP experiments from outer space. So we interviewed him, and Thelma Moss, who was head of neuropsychiatry at UCLA, Clive Baxter, who worked with lie detectors, was the lie detector expert for the FBI, but he also used lie detector to detect whether plants have feelings or not. And we conducted an experiment where Hollywood High School, we had half the botany majors talk to their plants and feed them and talk to them and tell them they love them. I know this sounds weird. And then the other half of the class fed their plants, but they ignored them. They didn't tell. The ones that the people said, we love you, to their plants grew twice as fast as the others, and twice as big and twice as lush. So we knew something was going on, whether plants were really picking up vibrations that they could respond to, or whether they were just getting extra oxygen from the students, giving them, a lot of attention.
Yeah.
But it was surprising for me because we had it on film, these plants just totally outgrowing the other plants, the ones that had been ignored, which says something about people. People that get love and nurtured seem to do okay, and those that raise and get ignored have a really hard time in life getting it together. But anyway, that was my film, and we opened it, and I loved it. It was just new, and I had Vaughn Meter was doing the music on it. Vaughn Meter did the old Kennedy album, the first Family album, and then Kennedy was assassinated, and Vaughn Meter was out of a job. No one wanted to hear him anymore. But he was also a good singer and a good piano player. So he wrote a couple of songs for the Pyramid. We had mutual friends, and when we recorded them, he was high on cocaine. And he hired all these great musicians, but I didn't know anything about cocaine at the time, and he told us that these musicians had to have cocaine or they couldn't record the music. And of course it wasn't true, but we got them cocaine somehow, and they all just got crocked right away, and music was unusable. So I was sitting at the right outside of the sound studios one day on this bench, just going, what am I going to do? I don't have music for the movie.
Yeah.
And this big black guy came and sat next to me, and he was bemoaning the fact that he could not get arrested on the West Coast. He said, they really like me in the South, so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, I told him about my movie, and he said, well, let me see it. And he saw it, and he said, I really like your movie. I can write you some music and record it for you. So it was Solomon Burke, who is, everyone knows is the king of gospel.
Yeah.
And he just did this beautiful music for the film. So again, it was just serendipity, just lucky things kept happening during the making of that movie. It opened in Texas. The distributor, long story short, was stealing all the money.
Oh.
So I stopped distribution. And that's common in our industry, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I stopped distribution, and I sued him. I took him to court. And it took a year, and I got my movie back, but I was broke. I didn't know what to do with it. I thought, what do I do now? So I stuck it on the shelf in my garage, where it sat for 30-some years here in Austin. And then a friend of mine saw the can sitting in my garage, and he said, what is that? And I said, it's a movie I did years ago. And he said, well, let me see it. I'd like to see what it's about. So I arranged a screening at the Alamo Theater, and they loved it. They loved the movie, and they wanted to distribute it. So I signed with them, and sure enough, they just sold it to Turner Classics Underground. It just played last month on Turner Classics after 35 years of sitting in the garage. So, Tommy, you never know. You never know.
That's wonderful, yeah. There was a movie that came out in the well, it didn't come out. It was made in the early 80s, and it never got a release, but Turner Movie Classics started playing it a few years ago. And they do that, you know, when movies are not released, and then they do get released, they play them, and that's a wonderful thing about Turner.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Of all these different jobs you did, though, in movies, what was the most rewarding?
Probably stunts. Well, I have to say, I love doing stunts, and it kept me from having to stand in line with all the actors that were out of work, because stunts, you either can do them or you can't. There's no way to fake it, or you can't be pretty or have a lot of connections. If you can't do the stunt, you're not going to get hired. And stunt people know who is or who is. Now on a set, I worked a picture last year where they asked me to coordinate the stunts. So I asked the actors, how many of you have done stunts? Because I wanted there were a lot of fights and stuff. They all raised their hands that they'd all done stunts, but they hadn't done stunts. Stunts is rolling cars, doing high falls, doing horse work, doing some really hairy motorcycle work. Most of them had just done like a slap or a little fight sometimes, a little Tom and Jerry kind of thing. So a lot of people today, and of course CGI has replaced a lot of stunt work, stuntmen. You no longer have to do a high fall. They can just green screen it, and it looks like you're doing a high fall. But back when I did stunts, we really had to do them. And it was just a thrill. And I loved it. I loved the working it out, especially with guys like Bogdanovich and Richard Rush, who would just let you sometimes even get your hands on the camera so that I would get to direct the cameraman also, the shots and from what angles. And it paid off on a film I did called Rainy Day Friends. We won Best Special Stunt in a Motion Picture at the International Stuntman Awards. And I wrote that stunt into that film specifically, and we were just a little independent film, but we beat out Beverly Hills Cop and a whole bunch of other big budget movies. Our little stunt won Best Special Stunt, which is the one you want to win. Not only win Best Stunt, but Best Special Stunt. Are you kidding? kidding me? That was great.
Yeah, you were coming up at a time when it was just a golden age for stuntmen. You came up at a time when there was guys like Tony Epper and Gary McLarty and Dar Robinson. I mean, just brave men.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You named three of the great ones right there.
Yeah. I've talked to quite a few stunt people, and they all agree that the Academy needs to recognize stuntmen.
They sure do. They sure do. It's unconscionable to me. I understand it, that they want to keep the illusion alive that their star is doing. However, if they're giving out awards to, makeup people and hairdressers, it seems like the guy that risked, guy or gal that's risking bodily harm or even their lives to get a film made should get recognition.
I know, they should. Now, I was listening to an interview you did last summer, and you were saying that you spent some time working at the infamous Spahn Ranch.
Correct.
Yes. You got any great stories about that?
Oh, golly. The Spahn Ranch. Well, I had lunch with Quentin Tarantino here in Austin.
Mm-hmm.
And we sat and talked about the two Nicholson Westerns we did up in Utah. And I was just amazed at Tarantino. He could do everyone's dialogue. He remembered what everybody said on the set. He knew who the craft service people were. He just knew so much. He and Gary Graver knew more about movies than anyone I've ever known. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I was with Quentin, and we were talking about not only the Nicholson Westerns, but the Spahn Ranch, where I'd spent some time working on different films. And when I saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Quentin wanted me to come to L.A. to appear with him on the movie, but I couldn't do it. I was sick or whatever reason I couldn't go. Mm-hmm. And that's when he told me, when you see the film, just remember, it's Once Upon a Time, which is how you start fairy tales. And I went, oh, okay. So I knew that going in when I saw that movie. But there was my whole conversation with Quentin in the scene where Brad Pitt goes to the Spahn Ranch. It was exactly like the set dresser. It should have won Best Set Dressing because it looked exactly like the Spahn Ranch looked at that time, except George Spahn, the owner of the ranch, his little shack house that he lived in did not sit up on a hill. It was on flat ground. There was a small porch, but only a couple of steps leading up to it. Whereas in the movie, Brad Pitt has to walk up this little hill to get in the house. Other than that, and the fact that in the Brad Pitt sequence, they have Tex Watson riding on a horse. Tex Watson never went near a horse. He always hung around. He was just a weirdo, a weird guy, Tex Watson. Yes. He always wore black, and he always had these guns on his hip. And he was always strutting around, acting like a big wheel, but talking to himself. Just weird, strange guy. And all the Manson people would come, the girls mostly, whenever we were shooting movies there. A lot of movies were shot there that were period pieces because there were no TV antennas and no big electric wires leading anywhere. So you could shoot all kinds of period pieces there. So a lot of films were shot there, and the Manson people would come and beg our lunches from, can I have your sandwich? Can I have your cupcake? Can I have that apple before you throw it away? That kind of thing. So they just seemed like very strange. Sometimes we hired a couple of them as extras, but mostly they just seemed like, I don't know if you saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood or not.
I've seen it 4 times already. I love it.
Oh, there you go. Well, you know how weird they seem on that ranch. All the girls on that ranch, that's just the way they were. Yeah. You knew right away there's something wrong with this group. They were just always a little bit around the bend, the porch slide out kind of thing with them. We were using a dune buggy that Quentin in the movie has a tire, gets slashed, as you know.
Yeah.
And Brad Pitt punches the guy out. Well, in our case, it was a dune buggy, and it was Bud Cardo's dune buggy, and it broke down. We were using it as a camera car. And I told one of the girls that I need a mechanic to fix this, because we need it the next day. Do you know anybody around here? Anybody know? And she said, we've got a great mechanic. I'll go get him. And she came back with Charlie Manson. I did not know who he was. He was just this little guy that was barefoot and bare chested. He wasn't wearing a shirt. He looked like he needed a bath, and he needed a good meal of some kind. And he didn't have these big hypnotic eyes. He looked like a shoplifter. He had these little slits of eyes that looked down at the ground. He would never look you right in the face, right in the eye. But he wanted $70 up front because he said he had to get some parts.
Yeah.
So Bud gave him $70, and we came back the next day, and the dune buggy was not fixed. So I said, get me Charlie Manson, and they went and got Charlie. And he came back, and I said, Charlie, Bud is a really tough guy. You'd better fix this, or he's going to give you a new anus. That's not what I said. I said, hey-oh, but nevertheless, he got under it and fixed it right away. So that was our experience with Charlie Manson. Most of the time, he stayed up in there. He was either on George Spahn's porch, or he was up in these shacks. There were these little shacks around the Spahn Ranch, sort of up in the hills, where they lived, where the girls of the Manson clan lived. And Charlie would be there, and he would send the girls down to bake lunches and bring them back to him. So he scarcely showed up on the set. But Tex Watson did a lot. In fact, Bud Cardos was asked to throw him off the set once. He was bothering the actresses. This is Tex Watson.
Yeah.
And Al Adamson said, Bud, get him off the set. So Bud went up and said, excuse me. And again, Tex was dressed all in black with these 6 guns on his hips. And Bud said, you're going to have to leave. This is a private set. So he left, and about 10 minutes later, he was back, bothering everybody again. And Al said, Bud, I thought I told you to get ready. Bud went over and just picked him up by the back of the neck and the seat of his pants and threw him about 20 feet through the air off of the set. I mean, he just wasn't going to mess around. And he just threw Tex Watson. And the next thing we know, Tex was grumbling and disappearing over into this little cul-de-sac next to where we were shooting. And he disappeared over the little mound in the road. And then we heard all this gunfire. And that's when the girl said, oh, those are real guns that he carries on his hips. And Bud said, why didn't somebody tell me that? Good God, he could have killed me. But that was Tex. That was our experience with Tex. Never saw him near a horse. Never.
Oh. So Quentin made that up then.
Right.
Wow. There's no information about George Spahn on the internet other than that he owned that ranch and he was involved in that whole mess. But do you know what his backstory was?
I did not. I knew that he owned the ranch and it was kind of run down. There were a couple of other ranches right near there, the Iverson Ranch, that were more upscale. And so I shot several pictures on the other ranches. And the Spahn Ranch, people went there because it was cheaper than the other ones. And so it was more economical to shoot there. But it was sort of ragtag also, low scale kind of place. And I knew George ran it. I would have to go in with it and negotiate a couple. He had a woman named Ruby Pearl who sort of ran the ranch for him. George was blind, or pretty blind, and he always, I never saw him in bed like Bruce Stern is in the movie. Yeah. Every time I saw him or had to finagle with him, he was sitting at that table when you walked in the door, and he would sit there with this big bunch of this coffee cups all over half full of coffee and cream and sugar, and rats everywhere, and mice, and sandwich wrappers, and half-eaten food lying around all over the place. So it was just kind of, I thought, gee, this is kind of a scroungy guy, and but he was the one I had to negotiate with for horses or whatever we were going to do to shoot on the property. And I kind of liked him. He had a big, boisterous laugh. And I didn't see him in a bad mood, like Bruce is in a bad mood in the movie. I never saw that.
Wow. Did you see when Brad Pitt won the Oscar?
Yes, I am so pleased that he did. Yeah, and he gave a shout out to Stuntman. And I thought, good for you, Brad. Someone needs to do it.
Yeah, I was really happy too. You know, I mean, it's funny, when I was younger, I didn't care much for Brad Pitt because I thought he was just another pretty boy actor. But then once I started seeing him in movies he's done, like in the last decade or so, especially the other one he did with Tarantino, Inglourious Bastards, I could really see what a brilliant actor he is.
Yeah, he is a good actor and a nice guy. From what I've never worked with him, but from everybody I know that has worked with him, I'll say he's a nice guy.
Yeah, he sure seems like a nice guy, the way he comes off and all.
Right.
Wow, that's amazing. And it's amazing you got out of there before things got really crazy.
Yes, I'm lucky.
So these days you're retired?
I am retired, semi-retired. I'm not doing stunts anymore, but I am acting. And I just did a film when I moved from Tucson back here, back to Austin several months ago. And the minute I got here, I got hired in the film right away, where I played Hunter S. Thompson as an old man, which was a gas. Yeah, I love that. So, yeah, I'm back here, and I'm going to do a film called Comanche Woman this spring. We're supposed to shoot in May. So I have to do a bunch of horse work in that, but I don't do any horse falls or anything. I'm just riding around looking important. So
that's good.
That's it. The stunts, I'm too old to be doing them anymore.
Yeah, you do one more of those, it could be your last.
Right. Exactly.
When did you move back to Texas?
I moved back here several months ago.
Mm-hmm.
I moved from Austin. I'd lived here forever, and loved it. I kept going back to L.A. In fact, for a long time, I kept an apartment in L.A. Even after I moved here. But I gradually fell in love with Austin, and I started doing a lot of work here and meeting a lot of people I liked. I was on the City Arts Commission. I had my own radio show, and I just liked the town. It's changed now, though, Tommy. It is so high-tech.
Yes.
And the artists almost can't survive here anymore. They just can't afford it. It's as bad as L.A.
Yeah.
Maybe a little worse, money-wise, I'm talking about. But I moved over a year ago to Tucson, Arizona, thinking, well, I'll be near L.A., and I'll be halfway between. It'll be really cool, except I couldn't stand Tucson. Yeah. I met some great people there, but I just did not like it. It's just not my vibe at all. Yeah, there was no film work going on. There were a lot of low budgets that no one was getting paid anything, and people desperate for work, so they were willing to work for nothing, but that's not me. So I just decided, well, it's L.A. or back to Austin. And I knew people in Austin that were getting ready to make some films, good friends of mine, and it's still a little cheaper than L.A., so I decided I'm going back to Austin, and here I am.
Wow. I lived in Arizona back in 2007 for about 3 months, and I had to get out. It was just way too hot there, and the people in my neighborhood were really strange.
Yeah, mine too. When I was there, they were very strange. Everybody was on crack or something, or crank, or whatever you call it.
Yeah.
Speed. Yeah, a lot of that.
Yeah, it's not a good vibe. But I'm glad though you're still acting at least, and that you have a lot of peace and happiness up there in Texas. And
Thank you, Tommy.
I wish you nothing but the best, Gary.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Tommy. Maybe we'll run into each other someday soon.
My pleasure. I hope so too, sir. My pleasure. And by the way, my birthday is the day before yours.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, Gemini. Here we are.
Here we are. Well, Gary, I hope you have yourself a great day, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Tommy. I appreciate it.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Well, there you have it. Gary Kent. Ain't he a cool dude? Man, someone who was actually at the Manson house, at the Spahn Ranch / Manson house that I interviewed. I'm just the luckiest fanboy in the whole wide world. I'm just really emotional right now. If you like this video, everyone, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, add me as a friend on Facebook, join my Tommy Kovac comedian page on Facebook, follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and all that fun stuff. Well, that's all the time we have this week on Splat from the Past. Until next time, this is Tommy Throwback Kovac saying, there's no shame in living in the past, because the present sucks. Later, dudes.